Good afternoon. I was going to say good morning, but it's good afternoon. It's fantastic to see you all who are watching from all around the world, to the Car, Sim and Race Driver Show, and on a special event that we have today, which normally would be in the evening, but we thought we'll catch you out. We'll do it all at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. It is the commentator and sim specialist. It is Jake Sparey. Good afternoon, Jake. It's great to have you on the show.
It's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Very, very welcome. Now, when I looked on your Facebook page, I saw an enormous history of sim racing and commentating and all these things. So the first question has to be, how did it all begin? How did you start your sim racing career and sim commentating career?
It all started with a failed relationship, which I think is going to be the weird way to say it. It all started with a failed relationship. I was 17 years of age at the time, and I think it was safe to say that I was looking for something to do, to spend my time and really try and get myself into, okay, what's next for me as a 17-year-old kid who's not doing very well in his AS levels and all the rest of it. And I saw on YouTube, I saw Apex Online Racing's Pro Mazda events and what they were doing at the time with Knut Martinsen, Fizzifan 91. And I saw that, and it was iRacing at the time, and I thought, this is incredible. This is a game that I've never seen before. I've never seen something look so realistic, so brilliant at the time, and we're talking 2015, I think, at the time. And I was like, oh, this is brilliant, except for the fact that you had Fizzifan 91 commenting on his own races, and I thought that was weird at the time. So I was like, well, I'm a plucky 17-year-old kid who's made no impression anywhere at all on the internet. I can do that for you. Well, why not? I can do that for you. And unfortunately, they said yes, and now everyone's been stuck with me for the last 6 years.
Oh, that's fantastic. So you just basically asked the question if you could commentate on the chap's races, and he said yes. That just shows you, isn't it? It's all about questioning the right people and being brave to ask the question. But so how did it progress from there then? So, because obviously you've done a lot of commentating. What's been your kind of the most successful commentary that you've done so far?
There are a lot of events that I've covered which I think have been successful, and a lot also which I think, if I look back now and judge myself to my standard now, that I think aren't successful. And I've been here, there, and everywhere. I've been around the business. I've done a lot of events. But there are a few that I am really quite proud of, and I think most of them have come actually in the last year or so. I'm really excited and proud at the work that was done to create the WTF1 charity event that happened on the race, which was, I think, fantastic, mainly due to the fact that, I was given license to go and create the event and create the formats and see how everything works out, and that came to a rip-roaring success. And on top of that, I've had the ability to call iRacing World Championship events in the past. And, those sorts of events have been a real eye-opener into, okay, what sort of level is professional, especially when you look at where, say, iRacing's commentary is looking right now, and they're grabbing in Radio Le Mans and people like Martin Haven and just so many people from the real world coming in that you now start to look at it and go, I'm a part of that history. I'm a part of that lineage where you look at commentary and you go, okay, that there's foundation now. Let's try and build. Let's try and move forward. Everything's a process, and you've got to keep learning to move forward and learning to feel like you can get better than you were the step you were, as you're only as good as your last broadcast.
So what was it that kind of attracted you to actually commentary work? Because that's it's a challenging environment. You've got to be able to think on your feet, and if things go quiet, be able to fill in and things and make it sound exciting. What was it that kind of made you think, yeah, this is what I can do?
That's a difficult question, actually, because it's not something that I actively thought of when I started. Like, why do I do this? Why do I enjoy this? And it's something more that's come later on in terms of how I've been trying to understand commentary, that it's got to where I am right now. And I think the understanding that I have of commentary now is that you are the storyteller. Without commentary, you find that races are very dull and very boring. And that's across the whole spectrum of sports as well. And I think it's very crucial to understand that the commentary position is the toughest position in a race to try and coordinate, try and work, and actually to try and do well, because a poor commentator doesn't get your race across. And if you don't get the race across, you don't get the drives across, you don't get the action across. And to be quite honest, you know, you don't promote the series enough. And I think that, you know, my role is to be a storyteller. My role is to make everybody else look good. And I've got to make some people look really nice and look really, really attractive. I've got to make some people look like they're the villain when it comes to a race with an incident. And, you know, no matter which way I look at it, everyone wants to be a hero. No one wants to be a villain. And, you know, you have to make friends. You have to make enemies along the way. So it's one of those things where commentary is probably the most thankless position that you find out there, maybe second to marshalling and stewarding. But it's one which is so rewarding when you put a really good story together and you feel like, say, you couldn't have written that in a book. Yeah.
So now that you've done commenting for a good while, do you have any kind of other commentators that you kind of look up to, or you kind of maybe learn a little bit from, things like that? Maybe perhaps from real motor racing or sim racing as well?
I look in a whole range of places. There's a lot of people that I look up to in terms of commentary. My first real person that I grew up and idolized was James Allen. And I was someone who, just in terms of my memory, missed the Murray Walker age. I sort of remember racing 02, 03, 04 and onwards like that. So James Allen was the guy that I grew up with. And, you know, I can pick him apart now, but he was someone that I went, God, I'd love to sound like him. I'd love to, you know, talk like him one day. But there's so many people that I look to right now. Keith Ewan on BT Sport, he's so good on the MotoGP when he's not talking about Cal Crutchlow. He's just so intelligent, and, you know, that sort of snappy out there style, I think, something I'd try and emulate when I try and work. I listen to people like Peter Drury, who I think has been brilliant when it comes to football commentary. I look all over the place in terms of finding some great voices. I listen quite a bit to Jim Nance, because he has a whole way of saying something really, really effectively. And on top of that, I'll even go to wrestling and say people like Jim Ross and Excalibur have been, you know, influencers to me in terms of the way that I try and call an event.
That's brilliant. Because one of the big things is that if you're watching a race and it's a bit quiet, and you have to try and make it sound exciting and interesting to keep the audience's attention. So what do you do when that happens? What's the kind of first thing you think of to try and fill in a gap when things are a bit quieter?
It's a process. So it depends on how you call a race and what you have in a race, because I've gone from a commentary position where I think up until last year we all had to try and figure things out ourselves and try and find the story and go to X car here, I want to talk about this, director come follow me. Whereas now we all go through the television routes, which is that we have a broadcast feed, we call explicitly what's on the broadcast feed, which is a little bit tougher in terms of that respect of trying to make things entertaining. But I think that what you find now in terms of, okay, how do you make a story interesting, is that you've got to talk about things maybe that you wouldn't think about first. So for me, when it comes to, okay, what hasn't been talked about, I look at, okay, where are they now? Where did they start? Do I know anything about this driver? Do I not know anything about this driver? How do I know this driver compared to other drivers that I feel are at a certain level? You know, you're always trying to find something, be it, you know, track knowledge, driver knowledge, car knowledge. There's always a little something that you can grab onto and you can continue to go with. You can fill for an hour just talking about the car, the track, you know, the drivers, and, you know, even if there's nothing going on and nobody's making an overtake and everyone's about 20 seconds apart practicing their social distancing, you know, there's always something there that you can talk about.
Yeah, no, that's great. I think that's what we always remember, especially from the older commentators, because we used to watch Grand Prix in the late 80s, early 90s, and kind of going forward from there. And there were some fantastic, they came up with some great phrases and great ways to kind of keep the audience entertained. And I always remember it was the French Grand Prix, I think, back in 1992, when Murray Walker and, it's gone straight from my head. Oh, the one who took on, what was the one that was there? The chap who died was about 43, James Hunt. And so the two of them, the video pictures went. And so Murray Walker and James Hunt had to keep going when nobody could see anything. And from that, it sounded like we were missing the best Grand Prix ever in history, when actually nothing was happening. And the Murray Walker was saying how close at least it was to Mansell, and he was challenging for second place or whatever it was. And then when it restarted and we finally got the pictures through, there was hardly anything had happened. He was about 5 seconds behind them. But I think they were obviously trying to do it to keep people motivated. But they also said, sometimes quite terrible things about drivers. There was one with, I think it was Philip Alliot, and James Hunt said, and there's Alliot, who had spun off and nearly took Mansell out in Portugal. And he says, Alliot, who always crashes anyway, has once again shown his lack of skill. How do you find, have you ever had to say something that you think was maybe quite brave against a driver in a race? And have they ever come back to you and commented afterwards?
All too often. All too often. I'm someone who's not afraid to share his opinion in terms of putting things out there. I've said all sorts of things over the years actually about drivers, and I've called people walking chicanes and all the rest of it when it's come to how people are driving. And the first thing that comes back when they you get a mouthful from it is I say nasty things like that because I want you to succeed. I don't want to say those sorts of things. It's, the simple fact is that every driver wants to be number one. And not everybody can do that when it comes to a race. And sometimes you have to settle for podium or top 5 or top 10, or, sometimes you crash out of the race. Every driver doesn't want to crash out of a race. But, when you see a driver do it over and over again, you say, come on, I want to see you get better. I want to see you improve. I have a lot of great respect for you. And, I think you could do X, Y, and Z to get better. There's just an outsider looking in. I've got a piece of story together. If you're going to crash 3 times in a row, I'm going to call you out. You crashed 3 times in a row. Come on. You can't ignore the story for niceties.
Yeah, and I think sometimes that you have to. Well, you're telling the truth of the event at the end of the day as well, aren't you? Because you can't ignore major stories in the race itself, which is good. Well, I'll start asking some of the questions that we have, and the first one was from Luke from the Sim Hub, and he said, "What was the most appealing thing that got you into sim racing?"
Probably how close everything was and how close all the battling was, because I think it's something that often gets overlooked and undersold when it comes to sim racing as a whole collective product, is that you really struggle to find racing out there in the real world that is quote unquote close. There'll be a couple of series here and there that will be close, but you will see that, for example, the top event of Formula One, it's normally a walkaway between 2 drivers at the end of the day, and you see that the battle is a minute down the road for 3rd place. Whereas you look at sim racing, for example, and you could put all the top 40 professionals in a car, who you could say is best in the world, and you won't find them split between 15 seconds after about 15 laps worth of racing. It's that exciting. It's that amazing. And that's the sort of ceiling level that you find, because everybody is at a level where they have to battle and they're fighting on a level playing field. It's almost a case where I think that sim racing is so idealistic that I think that sometimes sim racing does itself a disservice and makes itself maybe less of a marketability than it should do. But ultimately, I think that, with the right people up at the top, sim racing could very easily go on a fantastic boom period, which it has done over the last 5 years, and could continue to do so at a rate of knots, which, say, we've seen in other esports in the world. Yeah.
I certainly think from the number of interviews I've done with different YouTubers and sim racers, and it's amazing to see the growth of sim racing, which is fantastic. And I think it's reinvigorated a lot of motorsport enthusiasts who are kind of finding it quite hard to be involved, because it's maybe it's quite an expensive sport to be a part of if you're watching real racing, and sim racing gives you a chance to actually have a go, get involved for very little cost, if any really cost, just getting the right setup and games and things, or a PC or a console. So I think it's really helped people get back into motorsport, and especially when they do the big events like alongside. For example, I was talking to Josh Martin a few weeks back, and he had been at one of the GT3 series in Monza. So it was a real race going on outside, and then they had put their sim racing section in one of the halls at the end of the pit lane. And so you can see the cars going past in the background, the real cars going past, and then when they do a studio interview, and then you had the real race, the sim race that they were commentating on as well. And I think that's a brilliant way of really getting people involved. And what's the most exciting thing you think at the present that sim racing is doing, and what do you see the future of sim racing? What would be your view?
God, I did an article about 2 years ago, which isn't accessible now because I put it on a website that I've lost licenses to. But I put an article on where is sim racing going to be in 5 years' time, and I said Red Bull would be in esports, and they have done with a absolutely massive team work that's done with likes of Sebastian Joe, Patrick Holtzman, Graham Carroll. I was talking about prize money is going to be up there over 100,000. We know we're talking now 200,000. Dollar prize pool is pretty much standard now for a top championship. And there's so many things that are coming up which are really, really fantastic in terms of what sim racing is doing. What I find exciting, and what a lot of people maybe wouldn't find as exciting, is that I am a really big fan of the leagues which go on in sim racing, because for all the events that are going on with, say, Formula One and supercars and Formula 3, Formula 4, all the rest of it that try and jump on and get something going, the one thing that actually turns me off from sim racing and those sorts of events is the fact that they're drafting teams or they're drafting drivers to teams and using drivers as commodities more rather than using the already existing infrastructure within sim racing to say, oh, let's pick up a team like Team Redline. Let's pick up a team like Coanda. And that's where I think something, say, like the V10R League, which just concluded, which Team Redline won, was absolutely fantastic, because that was an event which, okay, Assetto Corsa old, you've got a lot of modding capabilities there, but what it offered was a way to rewrite the rules of racing, but also make the event feel like it's esports more rather than it's an extension of racing. And I think that sim racing leans far too much over to that side of the plate, when in reality, it's got to have a bit of balance. It's got to have a bit of both if things are, going to really couple up in matrimony.
Yeah. No, that's a great answer, I think, isn't it? Because I think the real communities are in some of the smaller leagues as well. I mean, I follow a lot of the things that the SimGrid does, and that's growing a huge amount. Plus other leagues in iRacing, and it's great because it's almost like it gets you right into the real feel of where people are in sim racing, and they're all trying to get better. I mean, that's why we all got sim rigs and things like that, because we all want to try and improve and get a chance to race in these leagues and do it as well as we can. So it's a great leveler in that way as well, which is good for it. So I'll ask some more of the questions that are coming up. This is from the Shortmaster. Was there a moment in sim racing that left you speechless, where you didn't know what to say during a time of commentary?
Yes, and there's been a couple of times where I've had that, and actually it came in one of the most inauspicious moments, I think, in terms of a commentary position, because sometimes I lean into the American style of commentary, which is where you sort of breathe, you give the moment a little bit of space, you let things settle, and then you go in and talk again. It took me a little while to get to that, but I sort of understand that from, the people that I was learning from earlier. But for me, the moment that got me speechless, and it's an inauspicious race, it's part of the iRacing Grand Prix series broadcast, which are done on SimSpeed TV on a Saturday night. And, it was just as simple as a battle going on for fourth and fifth, and two drivers who were really making progress, really needed a good result, both of whom threw themselves off the road at Malmedy Corner at Spa-Francorchamps. And it's like, oh, come on. Like, we haven't had a battle for about 5 laps, and the moment we're about to get it, they throw themselves off the road. It's like, oh, come on.
So when it just all goes horribly wrong, and that's it, isn't it? You're expecting something to happen, and it doesn't happen. But I think from as well, some of our viewers here that are commenting in the comments there are saying, like, there's the Hublot Ferrari esports race, and they're using Assetto Corsa as their platform. And that's gathered a lot of momentum. I know they've had some YouTubers there. They've had a lot of professionals driving in that, and that's quite big audiences, and people are quite behind it as well, which is quite good. How do you see? I mean, obviously you've got the kind of GT sports, and then you've got the single seater cars and the racing. And when you talked as well about the V10. The V8 version. What was the one you just mentioned?
V10R.
V10R, yes. How did all that work? Because that was, not many people might know about that. That's quite a special championship, that one.
V10R was something that was created in, I believe, conjunction with the United Arab Emirates, and was something that really quietly went on behind the scenes, and was something that even caught me by surprise a little bit, having a huge championship like that, because they asked a whole load of fantastic teams. They asked Porsche, I think they asked Racing Point, Renault, Redline, and they sort of brought that together into a format where every race was like, okay, well, you got like a 4v4 or something like that, and you race around the tracks for like, say, 5 laps. And effectively, you need as many drivers in front of the other drivers as possible. It's almost like you're trying to build the Ryder Cup into a race. And it's something that I've had a little bit of an idea of. Like a couple of years ago, I thought about when I was 20, maybe making something like that, making like a 1v1 tournament where you have 3 laps and whoever wins goes through, sort of thing. But ultimately, I think that V10R is really different, and I think with enough traction in the community and with enough people like pushing it as, okay, this is different, this is really fun, this isn't the racing I know, but it's something which I think could really go out there. You know, there's probably about 20 sim racing events a year which really capture the attention of everyone, and there's 100 that should capture the attention of everyone. No,
that's the thing. And of course the V10R series that uses the kind of current looking Formula 1 cars, but with the V10 engine, isn't it? So they do sound pretty good as well. And I think that was one of the big things. I saw that it was that Tiarmajuk was driving in that one. I think he's an Australian YouTuber who was in that, and it seemed great fun to watch. I watched the first one, and I thought, oh yeah, this is definitely a lot of fun. And I could see a lot of people getting behind that because of the noise and the kind of, it's a bit more invigorating when you get that kind of sound coming through from the engines from all those kind of cars, which is great. So what's your kind of current projects and projects to come that you're going to be working on, so that we can let all your fans and followers know?
I'm doing so much at the moment when it comes to not just sim racing, but esports in general. I've been working for the last 3 years with SimSpeed TV, who have been absolutely fantastic to me. The work that Jay Kennedy and Scott Fountain have done to build Australian sim racing into the power hub that it is right now. And when you've got drivers like Josh Rogers and Dane Warren and Jared Filsell and so many more that maybe people don't know, like Andrew Gilliam and Harley Haber and, you know, all of those sorts of drivers, you know, SimSpeed's done a wonderful job. And most of the drivers that you see at the top end of SimSpeed broadcasts, they're the sort of guys that you're going to be finding in the Repco Supercars E series, which is coming up from October to December. So that will be on a Tuesday or a Wednesday, and that will definitely be, actually it's on a Tuesday. It moved from Wednesday to Tuesday, so that'll be on a Tuesday, and make sure that you watch that. But you know, SimSpeed TV, they've done a wonderful job. I spend a lot of time with World Pro Racing on R Factor 2 and Gran Turismo Sport and the Assetto Corsa Competizione. For what they've done in multi sim racing, they have built that on a platform which is simply incredible, and have put sim racing on platforms which I think nobody has been able to network like World Pro Racing has. For example, they're on ESTV, which is the esports television network in the United States. They're on motorsport.tv online. They're on TVM Sports in Malta, which is just incredible. So World Pro Racing is something brilliant. I'm open for bookings, of course. So if anyone wants a sim racing event, name your price and I'll see if I'm available. But I do work with some Indian sim racing as well, IRE Sports. They are going to be really, really fun to work with. And it's something that isn't really talked about right now, but I think 2 years, 3 years, maybe even 5 years down the line, Indian sim racing is going to really grow when it comes to the market and everything like that. So, you know, keep an eye on IRE Sports as well. And of course, I'm also trying to break in to a real world commentary career as well. I jumped up to the Rich Energy British mini bikes about a month ago now, and that was incredibly fun to sink my teeth into that. And hopefully on top of that, I'll be streaming a little bit on Twitch as well.
Fantastic. So in terms of, you know, I suppose a lot of people wouldn't think, how much does it cost to actually put together a kind of sim racing league? I mean, I suppose depending on how much publicity you need, but I mean, in terms of an idea of figure sense, is it something that can be done on a shoestring, or does it, if you're going to make it work, does it need a lot of backing?
Depends what you're looking for. I know a lot of leagues that put a lot of money in, I know a lot of leagues that put next to no money in, and it depends on what sort of thing you're looking for your league and how you want it to get going and how big do you want it, because there's so many things you look at when you're trying to build a league and build an understanding. You've got to think about, okay, broadcast fees for one. Who do I want to broadcast it? How much do I pay the people who's broadcasting it? How much does the server cost, for example? How much is it going to cost to get people to build a mod, for example, depending on what sort of server you're on? How much are you thinking about putting out advertisements, and are you going to get people in to go and sponsor your series? There's a million different things you look at when it comes to a league. Someone like me, you know, I run a league. I'm about to run a second league as well. So I run a meme series called Max Bants, which runs every 13 weeks, so every 3 months or so. And that I put the minimal amount of effort in on, and it's just so fun to watch people try and work out what's the craziest way you can go and win a race. And people win a race in the craziest way, and it's all a laugh and a joke. But I look at something else that I am doing, which is with a group of people called Crest Autosport, which are effectively a rally group, but they're now really going to branch out into all sorts of simulators and pretty much everything out there on the market. You know, I could be a lot more serious about that. I can put, you know, maybe a lot more money into hosting servers, practice servers, race servers. I could think about, okay, do I need to group? Do I need to put people in a Discord server? Do I need to put people in a Facebook group? Do I need to go through different channels? And you know, you can just keep thinking and thinking, okay, what do you need? What budget do you have? Depends on, you know, how big do you want to go? How high is the ceiling? If you're looking for the best events in the world, you're probably looking at, you probably need at least, you know, 10,000 in the back pocket if you're going to attract the top drivers. But, you know, if you're just looking to put on a fun league where drivers are going to be quick and everyone's going to want to race for a good time, you don't really need to spend any money on a prize pool. You can say the prize is winning.
Yeah. So that's the thing. Is it quite expensive to buy servers and things like that? I've heard of a few people who have servers on things like Assetto Corsa and things like Assetto Corsa Competizione. Is that something that's quite expensive, or is it fairly cheap to do?
I don't know what the prices of servers are in other places. I know that for iRacing, for example, which is where I spend the majority of my time, you're paying about 50 cents for an hour's server. So every 50 cents you put in, you know, you put in servers. But I know people who have put in so many servers trying to build up a series and try and build up a community around it. I know there's people in Oceanic Sim Racing, which is down under, who put on about 6 servers every week for, actually, no, it's a lot more than that. They put on, say, 5 qualifying servers, 3 race servers, 3 practice servers for the big championship, 2 race servers sometimes. And that price sort of adds up over a year, where they're paying, say, for example, if it's £100, say, for a year subscription on iRacing, they're spending an extra £300-400 just on servers alone. So you really do sort of get that understanding of, okay, some places could be really cheap with servers. You could put up a server for nothing. Something like Gran Turismo Sport, for example, something like, say, Forza Motorsport. It's not going to cost you a penny because you've bought the game. You've bought everything that you need to sort of get yourself in for that quick fire into sim racing. But say for other places who need to recoup money in other ways, you know, you are going to be spending a bit more, and you really do need to look over your shoulder a little bit when it comes to servers.
No, it's good to know, because there's lots of people trying to do leagues and championships, and some of my followers were recommending that I start a hat-trick racing league. So we'll have to see how we go, but it's good to get an idea of what it costs and how it can all work and come together. And obviously your experience there is invaluable in how you put them all together. But now I'll go back to a quick question that I've got from one of my co-hosts here, from Andrew Marr. He says, James Allen's downfall was that he tried to sound like Murray Walker for effect instead of just being himself. Has Jake ever fallen into that trap? And if so, how did he pull himself out of it?
That's so difficult to look at in terms of trying to pull yourself back out and say, am I trying too hard to be something I'm not? And, you know, you look at it and you take advice from a whole manner of places. You know, James Allen was someone who I think was really good as a pit reporter, came in for the first couple of years and looked really good. But, you know, when you're following Murray Walker, let's be fair, it's the
yeah.
toughest job in the world to follow Murray Walker. You can have the most amazing commentator, arguably the greatest commentator that ever lived by history and by fans, is Murray Walker. The person after Murray Walker is always going to sound not as good. Now, to give credit to James Allen, he sounds a lot better than the guy who jumped in 2009, 2010 to go and follow him. So ultimately, you know, we haven't had really a good commentator until David Croft came along. And that was really, really tough to find in terms of a lead commentator. But for me, in terms of, have I had a moment where I've tried to sound like someone that I'm not? I wouldn't say I've had a moment where I've sounded like someone I'm not. I'd more say I'd have a moment where I've maybe lent into too many little elements here and there. And it's taken someone, and a good friend of mine, Brenton O'Brien, he runs the Evolution Racing team. He recently retired from racing or sim racing at the back end of this year. And, you know, he sent me a message one day and said, you know, you're not as good as you were maybe a year ago, 2 years ago. And that was like, oh, am I not? Well, let me have a look at what I've done. Yeah, you know, you kind of make a point. So you start to look at things, and sometimes it's the people around you that, you know, that can say things to you, will say things to you, and go, you know what? You know, sometimes you do need someone to tell you you're not as good as you were that time, and you need to have a little bit of a relook at things, because it's so easy just to fall into habits. If, you know, everyone's just telling you, oh yeah, you're doing a good job, you're doing a good job, you know, doesn't give you much to work on.
It sounds like you're very kind of, I mean, to be open to criticism in that way, it's hard to take. No, it's a good thing that you're able to kind of hear that, and then you take it as a complete way to improve what you're doing, which is really good. We had some quite fun times in the summertime there, you know, when they were doing the F1 esports earlier on in the year before the Formula One series started properly. And so me and my co-host Andrew Marr decided we'd try and do some kind of, it was a kind of podcast commentary, because we could watch the race as it was live, turn the sound down and turn the sound off, and we did our kind of alternative commentary on it. And it was quite hard. I thought it's good for us to practice. We'll have a go and see what it's like, because we quite enjoyed the chance of doing it. But because they weren't really serious races, especially when they had a lot of the guests, you know, they had damage off, so they were just crashing into each other, and it wasn't really that great. There were one or two exceptions where they did quite well, which was the Brazilian race, Brazilian Grand Prix. I think it was Albon and I think it was George Russell had a very, very close battle for most of that race. So that we kind of felt that was their most serious attempt. I think sometimes we've certainly found it's easier to commentate on a more serious race, which is a kind of proper race, than if it's just a bit pandemonium and people aren't, you know, there's too many easy ways out. You know, if there's no damage on the cars, people didn't care what they were doing, and they just crashed into folk for the sake of it. How do you find, I mean, obviously your races are very, very serious. What's your approach, you know, if someone asks you to do a kind of comedy race, or not a comedy race, but, you know, something that's a bit more entertaining, how do you change your approach to something like that?
I don't really change too much. I like to think that you can be serious and you can be funny at the same time. I think that there is ways about that where you can do that, and there's ways that you can commentate, and, you know, you can have a little bit of a laugh and a little bit of a joke about things whilst you go along as well. And, you know, I think that most of commentary comes down to dynamic and style, and it's not just the dynamic of what race have you got, what sort of style of race it is. I'll call a casual race the same way I'd call a world championship race. That for me is the way that I do things. I give everything 100, and, you know, how I balance and nuance things. Maybe I'll be a little bit more lax. Maybe I'll say things a little bit more loosely. I'll be a bit more jokey, a bit more jovial. But at exactly the same time, it comes down to dynamic of who you're working with. You know, there's some people I can work out here in the business who I would take things completely 100% seriously with, because that's the way that they work. There's some people who I know I can have a really good joke with, and in terms of a teamwork dynamic, you know, I can have a really, really good laugh with things. It's all about who you work with, and really what doesn't get talked about enough with commentary, it's about who you're paired with and who you get along with.
Yeah. If you bounce off them well, isn't it? That's always the thing. That just before we ask another question, just to everyone who's watching from all over the world, I know we've got people from Australia, New Zealand, we had Norway as well. If this is your first time watching the Car Sim and Race Driver Show, we've got lots of interviews that we've done with many sim racers and also real racing drivers too. So if you want to look at our back catalogue, it'd be fantastic. And of course, you can hit that subscribe button and give us a like as well. That would be fantastic. But of course, we have Jake Sparey here today with us. And I have to say, I was so impressed. I thought, where am I going to start with this commentary history that you've done with all these different companies and races that you've done? We've talked a little bit about the future of where you think it's going, but in your own time, do you find that you race a little bit as well? Do you have any time at all to do a little bit of racing for fun?
Right, now this is where things are going to get very interesting. I like to say that I am from the Jacques Villeneuve School of Sim Racing Driving, mainly because I use one of these when it comes to drive. And, you know, people hate me for all the world because I drive on an Xbox One controller. And I say, well, that can't be the worst because I used to drive on a PS3 controller. But for me, when it comes to racing and really going out there and racing, I race for fun. I don't race seriously. I don't race esports professionally. And I don't have the pace to race really fast or fun or professionally. And, you know, if I find a series that's fun and I have a little bit of free time, I may jump on from time to time, but I really don't race that often.
Yeah. So, and in terms of as well, do you have any kind of tips and hints for people who are running league racing and they're maybe trying to commentate because it's on a shoestring and they're finding that that's the job that's been allocated to them? What would you recommend as to how they start, or what kind of approach is a good way to start off as a commentator?
If you're trying to commentate, the first thing you need is time in the booth, because it doesn't matter how much you think that you're good or you're bad, or you haven't done it before and you want to try, or if you are trying a little bit but maybe you're a little bit unsure of yourself. The one thing that will get you better is time and just doing it more and getting an understanding and getting a feel of what makes a commentated race. The second thing that you do is you look at dynamics and look at other people who have been out there, who have been commentating for a little while, and go, okay, maybe I can learn this. Maybe I can add this into my repertoire and all of the rest of that, which, you know, brings in together. So you can always learn from someone else. I'm still learning now. I'm 6 years in the business of sim racing commentary. So I still think I've got a long way to go. And that proved when I went to the British Mini Bikes Championship, because I felt a little bit out of my depth with someone who I listened to for the first time and thought, you know, let's be honest, I don't know if maybe I'm going to learn that much from him. But then I went and I learned so much more than I thought I did. And I didn't even ask a single question to the guy about commentary or anything like that. I just looked and went, wow, this guy knows a lot. And I can take this and this and this. And God, there's so much more I can learn from it. So you're always learning. You've got to get time in the booth. And on top of that, try and do different sort of things as well. Don't just be satisfied with doing just one race a week or just one type of racing, because you're never going to expand and learn about all the differences that are needed in styles of racing. I'll happily say that I've done 24-hour events. I've done sprint races of 30 minutes in a Mazda. I've even gone and done things like NASCAR events from time to time, just because it gives you that flexibility to go, well, okay, well, how can I call this maybe a different style and learn and take that and maybe add a little element of this here and there, which, you know, helps to build up, you know, a library in the back of your head. So, you know, everything out there is there to only help you. And time, and especially with sim racing, because there's so many sim races out there, and there'll be people who want broadcasts and for people who want to have that fun, you know, you've got so much time available. And I know so many people who want to do it that just don't. And, you know, the platform's there. All you've got to do is ask. And, you know, most people are nice here in this industry. They'll say yes.
That's great. I mean, what do you say are the essentials for commentating? Because obviously when you're watching it, especially on a sim race, sometimes, you know, some of the key bits are blocked out on the screen when we watch them. For example, all the people competing. Have you ever found it hard to think, right, you know, to recognize a car number or who is driving what car? or do you find that you're always given the information you need to be able to find out who is who?
Oh, sometimes I jump onto a broadcast with 2 minutes to go and just go call it. So I don't know what the paints are. I don't know what the numbers are. I don't know anything. And effectively, you're doing the ECW or Extreme Championship Wrestling thing where Paul Heyman puts together a match on a napkin. He says, right, who's here? Who's here? Rey Mysterio. Rey Mysterio's here and he can go wrestle. Juventud Guerrera. So we can have that sort of match. And it's that sort of thing what you're looking at, where sometimes you won't even know who you've got to commentate on and who you've got to race on. And so you've got to work on the fly in terms of who's what, who's who, who's going to do exactly what's where and who's racing. So I honestly think that the thing that's needed for commentary is excitement. That's the first thing I have. If you're not exciting, you're not selling. And, there is one company that I've worked for in the past that I will very happily name in this situation, Apex Racing TV, who has a big problem with trying to be exciting from time to time. Not to say that other companies aren't and other commentators aren't, but the first thing you have to have is an excitement mode. Because if you're just going to be there talking and, in a low sort of tone, you look at Radio Le Mans, for example, even in a 24-hour race, it sounds exciting. It sounds like they want to be there. It sounds like it's going to be something you really want to enjoy. If you don't have that level of feeling like you're excited by it and sounding like you're excited by it, even if you are, that's it. You're not selling it to other people if you don't sound like you're excited. The first thing you have to be is excited. Not overly excited, but to a level where you feel like, you're excited.
Yeah, and an actual enthusiasm, isn't it, for what's going on? You see, if it's too low tone, people are going to be thinking, he's not even interested in what's going on. No, that's fantastic. Now we've got another question here regarding commentators. You need to know the racers' personalities, and David Coulthard is an example of someone who definitely makes his opinions known whenever Grosjean does a goof. Does Jake think the commentary is better when the commentator has an opinion?
It depends on the role. I think it's a lot easier for someone in a colour position who has been in a championship, who's been in and around drivers and sort of understands the driver's mentality. It's a lot easier for them to have an opinion. What people normally say is that, the guy who's in charge, who leads the broadcast, his role is storytelling. His role is not to have an opinion or understand anything about that. But, how many times have we heard about the opinion of David Croft this season about Cyril Abiteboul getting a tattoo for Daniel Ricciardo being on the podium? We've heard that almost every race for the last 5 races when Renault's been doing well. The point is that, opinions are part of commentary. This is, as much as it is the race's story, commentary is personal. It's your story as well. You get to tell someone else what you think about this race. You are guiding an audience and saying, this is what's happening in this race. Mm-hmm. You can give your opinion. And the first thing I'll say is your opinion's right until it's wrong, which is the point in saying that your opinion is right unless enough people tell you it's wrong. And you have the ability to go and change your mind and say, I'll hold my hand up. I made a wrong opinion and, my opinion's changed. And that's something that I think in society often goes very much underappreciated right now, is people who can actually go out there and change their opinion. Yeah.
Or admit when they were wrong. Yeah, I think that's a big one, isn't it? So in terms of all the commentators out there, who's been some of the biggest names that you've ever met or in motorsport? Who's been your claim to fame? Because obviously you've been around quite a bit and commentated on lots of different races.
I haven't really had the opportunity to really commentate with anybody that's really been professional in that sort of sense. I've sort of been working around with a few guys here and there who've done quite well. There's been a few people I have worked with. Lockie Mansell over at SimSpeed. He's someone who's on the Australian broadcast circuit from time to time. Normally does, a few lower style events in terms of the categories, but he's someone who definitely, I think, could be a very, very good pit reporter. I think for supercars in the future, he's someone definitely to look out for. But I've had an opportunity to talk to a couple of people, and I could sit here and talk for hours about how good Andrew Coley is, who's the guy who's the commentator of the FIA World Rallycross. I sent him a LinkedIn message about a month and a half ago, and that somehow spurned itself into about an hour's worth phone call with him. And I was someone who was definitely not on his radar, and I was like, hey, can I have a little bit of help? Can I, am I doing well right now? Is there anything that I can learn from? Is there anything that I can understand so I can, maybe just push into the industry a little bit? And that's, I don't have enough words to say how much of a nice person Andrew Coley is. And really, in terms of what he's done for me, in terms of understanding things, I'm so grateful for what he's done, and just how much time he has for people who are happy just to just ask a question. And that's the thing with a lot of people. A lot of commentators, or some commentators, will be very defensive of their craft, and they don't want anybody rising up and taking their place, as this industry has a tendency of doing. It's almost like you build yourself up to stab someone in the back. But in terms of nice people, and I think it goes the same way for me as well. All you got to do is ask. I can't help you if you don't let me know that you need some help. So all you've got to do is ask.
Fantastic. Now that's the thing. And now here's a statement. I wonder if you'll agree with this one. According to my co-host Andrew Marr, said the best in the last 25 years, apart from Mr. Walker, of course, is Martin Brundle, closely followed by David Coulthard and then Mark Webber. And he also says Lee McKenzie is very good, as was Louise Goodman. Louise Goodman commentates or does pit work in the BTCC. Would you agree with some of that statement, or do you have particular commentators that are working out there in Formula One and other races that you think are right at the top of the game?
You're starting to blur the lines now between a commentator, a presenter, a pundit, an analyst, and someone who gives interviews. They're all very, very different, but they all sort of blend into this same realm. But, sometimes, there are a few differences. I disagree. I think Martin Brundle is very good, but I wouldn't say that he is the best. I think he's been an iconic voice. But I'd say someone like Keith Ewan, I think, has been really, really fantastic. I think you can look up and down the motorsports industry, and there's people out there who have done really, really amazingly. But I honestly think that you have to be really, really cautious and say, who's really, really good, because there will be a whole boatload of people who are sat underneath who could really run themselves up to the top. Someone like John Hindhaugh has been someone who's been incredibly good. And, you can even go over to the United States. I, don't often talk about this, but I really like the commentary that Mike Joy does, who does the NASCAR. He's someone who you just really learn and listen to and say, he just gets it, and you have this feel of this is a NASCAR race when Mike Joy's on the call.
Yeah. No, I have to admit, I've watched some of the iRacing when they were doing iRacing when they're doing the NASCAR and also their IndyCar races over the summer, and they were fantastic. I have to say, because I think they were using the same commentary teams as they do normally for the real racing, and it was really great to listen to. And I thought also when you watched it on YouTube, it looked as real as real cars. It was not much in it when it was on in HD and being broadcast out there. I suppose, as you say, you're correct about that last phrase, is that there was a number of different positions there. But it's interesting your take on Martin Brundle, and obviously you're a fan of David Croft as well. And I think there's a bit of a love-hate with David Croft. I know for a lot of F1 fans, I think he's grown on the F1 community. I don't know if he was that well liked at the start, but he's definitely got a good position now. I think he's done quite well. How about some of the other older ones? I suppose, and the chap who replaced James Allen was Jonathan Ledyard. That look says it all. But he only lasted a couple of years. I quite liked when it was David Coulthard and Martin Brundle. When they were at BBC, I thought they were there for a year or two and did quite well. Is there an era there that you quite like, or a kind of combination that you think would be very good?
The thing with Brundle Coulthard is that you had a dynamic where you've got a colour commentator and a colour commentator, which effectively means you get all this information about the cars and the tracks and the drivers, but it's almost like going in and looking at a storybook, and it's all description. You get about 8 pages of description, and you get about 2 throwaway sentences, which drive forward the plot, which some people like. Some people love a really, really descriptive storybook. But, you know, for me, as someone who is a fan, who looks at, you know, racing and motorsport and commentary, that's not a cup of tea that, you know, I think I'll drink all the way to the bottom. Jonathan Ledyard had a problem, and that was he said problem too much. He was someone who came from a sports background in the BBC, and just didn't click, just didn't move forward. And quite honestly, I don't think that he sold the races enough, and I think that he bumbled around for 2 years looking for something to be there, which wasn't quite there for him in my view. So that's something. In terms of eras which I like commentary, I really like the commentary that's being done right now by Croft and Brundle. I think they're very entertaining. I think they've done well. I've been someone who watched quite a bit of free broadcasting, and you know, when it moved over to Channel 4 and the like, I really liked what Ben Edwards was doing on commentary with David Coulthard and that sort of dynamic. But now I'm starting to look at it, and Ben Edwards has been in the role for a long time. I look at Ben Edwards as someone who had a really, really good early 2000s and late 90s calling like the kart sort of area. But now I think he's gone backwards into a role where he's just coasting and without trying to slander, almost like he's looking for a paycheck right now and is commentating because this is a good job and, you know, he can have some fun with it a little bit. I don't think that Ben Edwards commentates at his best right now, but he will go down as someone else who I think deserves to be up there as one of the great commentators.
You know, that's good to know. Now, every kind of commentator has a kind of phrase that they might use, whether they want to use it or whether it becomes something they regret. You know, for Murray Walker, it was go, 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 you know, and so on. Do you find that there's a phrase that you use, maybe more than you would like to, or something that is your kind of, that's your calling card, how people can recognize your commentary?
Oh, there's too many. There's far too many. You could make a bingo with sort of the things that I'd say sometimes on a broadcast, and you know, there's things that I try and get out of my broadcast repertoire as quickly as possible. I've had a habit in the last few broadcasts of saying that it's trying to negotiate a position. And there's also an adage of mine which I say, well, the door's left half ajar, and a jar's not a door, so therefore it's not a move, so it's not open. You know, there's a couple things here and there that sometimes I do say, which maybe I can change and learn and go to. But, you know, when you've been going around 6 years, you know, there's only so many ways you can say that's an overtake. So, you know, you'll find something that you'll find comfortable with.
So here's a quick challenge for you then. If you were to introduce the show here as the Car Sim and Race Driver Show, and our today's guest is Jack Sparey, have a go at that. Go and introduce yourself on the show, and let's see what the fans think of a way of introducing the show.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Car, Race and Sim Show. This is an absolutely wonderful, wonderful event. And with me today is someone who has shouted all over the world from the comfort of his seat. His seat's not quite that comfy, actually, at the moment, as he curls up on it right now. It's Jack Sparey here today, bringing along a little bit of a shouty, shouty man feel.
Fantastic. That's brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Well, we'll have to need to make sure that we watch you for your races that are coming up. What's the next race that you'll be commentating on, so we can all get ready to watch that?
Well, health, of course, because, you know, I'm actually quite struggling here. I've had flu for the last 8 days, which has not been nice. All things going well, I think that I'll probably be looking at Saturday night. Probably is going to be the time where I'm going to be broadcasting next. It'll be 9 o'clock British, so work that out for where you are around the world. And I'll be calling the iRacing Grand Prix Series for round 6, I think, of the championship.
Fantastic. Oh, that's great. Well, it's absolutely brilliant to have you on the show. We've had a request, actually. One of my other co-hosts has asked you. We have a special motto on the show. and it's when we kind of rebranded a couple of years ago, and it is drive fast and try not to crash. How would you say that as a commentator?
Well, he's got to drive fast and, well, try not to crash.
That's great. That's brilliant. We also have another one which is coming on our t-shirt, which says winning the race at the first corner, which is a kind of spoof on itself, because one of my co-hosts did his racing license at Silverstone. And when he did it, it was about a 3 or 4 day course. He got all the kit and all the stuff, got ready. He was third on the grid for his first race, and it was all very exciting. And they had the driver's debrief or briefing beforehand, and they all went into the room, and everyone was very quiet and very sensible. And then they said, "Does anyone got any questions?" at the very end. And Jonathan comes up to the head chief instructor, says, "Yes, I'm going to win the race at the first corner." And the guy just put his hands to his head and went, "No, you haven't learned a thing." Obviously he was joking. But this was the thing. And they ended up, he did finish third as well for his first race, which wasn't too bad along it on the Stow circuit at Silverstone, the kind of the small circuit. So it's been fantastic. I'm just quickly checking to see for any more questions before we quickly finish off. But everything has been incredibly positive. All saying that they really relate to you as a commentator because you bring over the enthusiasm and bring the story to the races, which is fantastic. So hopefully we'll make sure we're watching you on Saturday night. If you've got any links and things like that you would like to send me for future events, just let me know, and I'll put them on the show and give you a shout out for those. But it's been fantastic to have you on the show. And for all our viewers who've been watching from all over the world, thank you very much for joining us on it's a special afternoon show with Jake Sparey on the Car Sim and Race Driver Show. And this Saturday night at 8 o'clock, just for a short interview, we've got Keirith Cart, who is a YouTuber and karting specialist and also races on GT Sport. So make sure you don't miss that. But for now, I'll leave the last word to Jake Sparey to finish and say goodbye. But thank you very much for coming on the show, Jake, and make sure you stay on the line when we finish the show.
Well, no worries at all. A pleasure to be here. And of course, for those who haven't already, you have yourself the opportunity here on YouTube to look just down there. There's a little subscribe button as well. And if you haven't already, just give that a little like. Likes are really good for the YouTube algorithm. So give this man a very, very big help, because the work that he's done over the last couple of years has been nothing short of sensational. From Hugh Hattrick and myself, Jake Sparey, we're signing out right now here with the Car, Race and Sim Show.
Thanks very much.